should we continue our aid to Afghanistan and do more, or should we stop it because of the Taliban being in charge? Joining us to discuss this, former advisor to Tony Blair, Jonathan Powell, and alongside him, columnist and foreign correspondent Ian Birrell. So, very good morning to both of you. People will have seen the story of Mohammed, the desperation, and, you know, we all feel desperate for the people who are left behind in Afghanistan and those who feel that they have to put their lives at risk. Meanwhile, the latest statement from the Foreign Office, we're increasing our aid budget for Afghanistan this year to £286 million. Now, Ian, is that a good thing because we want to look after the people of Afghanistan, or is that a bad thing because it's funding the Taliban?
Well, it's a very natural response to want to help people who are in need and to try and help people amid the plight of what we're seeing every day from Afghanistan and from Kabul. But the trouble is, aid has been a very destructive force. It's been a destructive force for 50 years, since the industry really began to take off in Biafra with the Nigerian civil war in the late 60s. And we've seen it cause problems in Rwanda, in Ethiopia, in Somalia, in all around the world. Afghanistan, we have to ask ourselves, why did it collapse? And one of the primary reasons why it collapsed was because so much money was pumped in, absurd amounts of money. If you just take the aid alone, $50 billion was put in there. Now, if that had just been given to the Afghan people, that would have made each Afghan citizen a millionaire, and we'd have had 13 billion spare. OK,
so your problem is not so much that it's the Taliban in charge, and that's why we shouldn't continue giving hundreds of millions in aid. Your problem is with foreign aid in principle. My problem is it's very corrosive. We've seen in Afghanistan that it fostered the conflict, it gave money to the insurgency, it undermined support because so much was being stolen so blatantly. It undermined democracy, it undermined support for the government. And now you have to ask yourselves, why do we want to support the Taliban anyway at the end of all this? It's illogical. It's a natural sense to try and help. But every time you look, there's this illusion of aid that the countries that most need it are those least able to cope with it.
Jonathan, he makes a good case, doesn't he, certainly about trust. I mean, there'll be lots of people at home saying, why on earth would we trust the Taliban with foreign aid that was given to them to be distributed? Because they've given us no reason to. Although, of course, we see Joe Biden making his big speech to the American people about why they pulled out and saying, we have huge leverage over the Taliban to ensure that they do what they say they're going to do and allow women to go to school and allow women to go to work and look after people and allow people to leave if that's the case. What's your position on this? Because, sort of, you know, where does the leverage come from if we aren't offering the aid in order for them to sort of be held to account?
Well, I think there are two things we need to try and do in the new situation in Afghanistan. One is we have a moral duty to the people we've left behind after 20 years, and we need to make sure they don't starve. And the most likely outcome in Afghanistan is probably a renewed civil war. And that's going to mean many more of the boat people you just were showing coming across the channel. People are going to be desperate to leave Afghanistan, and they're going to make their way here one way or another. So we have both a moral interest in doing that and a self-interest in making sure the situation in Afghanistan doesn't get much worse. But secondly, we don't have to give the aid to the Taliban. That's not the idea at all. What you have to try and do is make the assistance we give conditional. Try and find a way of making the Taliban not return to the 1990s. We have no idea if they're a new Taliban or not. I'm pretty sceptical that they are. But we can find out if we set a series of benchmarks they have to meet and then ratchet that up. If they don't do it, then they don't get the assistance. Now, not the assistance to the starving Afghan people, but the assistance they need to run the government, because they don't have the technical expertise to run a government.
Ian, what about that? I mean, it's a political tool. People often say that about foreign aid, that actually it's a sort of soft power that we have, that we can actually use it to manipulate the Taliban government.
The trouble is, it's absurd to think that in a one-party system that you're going to have really any control on it. The idea you can control aid, we see this in places. We saw it in Ethiopia under a previous dictatorial government. We see it in Rwanda, where we're pumping aid into a regime which is actually sending people to try and kill people in Britain. And yet we still, and you know, they spend £30 million sponsoring Arsenal, and we keep pumping aid into a dictatorship. We see it's the same problem, the idea that you can control these situations when you can't. The reality is what we should be doing is thinking, what can we do to really help the situation? Now, there's lots we can do. We can do stuff at home by tackling corruption. We can stop funding regimes like the Saudis, like Pakistan, which are actually exporting terror. There are things we can do. We should look at home, but what we cannot do is solve the problem in a complex fissured society like Afghanistan with a few bits of aid, all we actually do is make matters worse again and again and again.
Let's talk to somebody who's involved in aid work out in Afghanistan. They work as an aid worker for the Penny Appeal. His name's Quadratullah. Very good morning to you. I know that we've only just been able to establish a connection with you, but what would happen if the UK stopped providing aid to your country?
Thank you. Good morning. In short, I can say that this will be a disaster for the people of Afghanistan as part of the member of the International Committee.
What is the Quadratullah? What is the situation like now in Afghanistan since the Taliban have taken over? Are they allowing you and other aid workers to continue to distribute the aid that you have?
The situation in Afghanistan is going through a very uncertain situation. In the government, there is a vacuum of the government, and the de facto government is getting under pressure day by day because there are a lack of services, banks are closed, and existing services are becoming collapsed. The World Bank has paused their funding, which was previously channeling its fund through the government of Afghanistan, and they are now assessing whether the current government will be recognized. But those projects which were off budget, which means that they were not directly channeled through the government, are resuming. Yes, there is a thirst both in communities and the local authorities. At least the pressure from themselves is a little bit relieved. But what we can say that the Afghan people, those who are living, 80% of them are living under the poverty line, are in desperate need of help. If it is not through the mechanism of the government, the international community and donors should directly contact NGOs and non-governmental organizations to offer aid, so that there will be no place for any other third party, and that the aid can directly go to the beneficiaries.
Ian Birrell, he says it would be a disaster. I mean, somebody who's working on the ground there, 80% of the population living under the poverty line. I mean, if we don't carry on giving aid, how does... I mean, it still seems surreal to be talking about it. The Taliban government raise the money in order to provide for its people.
Well, I have great respect for people like that, and I don't at all besmirch what they're trying to do. But the reality is, why do we have such high levels of poverty in a country which has had $50 billion of aid pumped into it, and yet the poverty rate has soared there? Ask yourself why that is happening. It shows this aid illusion that Professor Angus Deaton, the Nobel-winning British economist, has talked about this problem, that actually you pump money into systems like this and it makes all the problems worse. It actually explodes the problems. It undermines support for government. It undermines attempts to solve things like education, poverty, entrepreneurship, all these sorts of things. And so you have to just ask yourself, what's really going to help? And yes, you can give some money now to help in the humanitarian, and I can see the arguments for that. But ultimately, we're going to keep propping up, we're going to keep pumping the money in like we have for 20 years. Are we going to keep pumping it in and support propping up the Taliban government?
Well, Jonathan,
and do we think that's going to help?
This would prop up the Taliban government, wouldn't it? I mean, how would they get the money if we stopped the aid? I'd be extremely concerned about their money-raising policies.
Yeah, I think we're talking about two different things here, as Quadratullah explained. I think Ian has a very good point about corruption, particularly in the old government, where the money went and the impact that it had.
Do we have any more faith in the Taliban replacement?
Absolutely. Well, probably on corruption, yes, but not on many other things, no. But the point is that, as Quadratullah was saying, the money is going to go through the UN, through NGOs, direct to the people who need it, not through the hands of the Taliban. That aid needs to go, or they are going to starve. We are going to face many more immigrants. We are going to face terrorism and drugs coming here. We're going to face a civil war. The other problem they need is recognition. They need technical expertise. They need the money for the government. That is not going to happen. Now, Martin Griffiths, the head of the humanitarian arm of the UN, was in Kabul yesterday, meeting with the Taliban. And that aid aspect, the humanitarian aspect, needs to happen. The rest of it should be conditional. The international community should come together and set conditions. Unless the Taliban meet those, they won't get that support or recognition.
Okay. Quadratullah, I wonder if we could come back to you just before we finish here. How are you feeling on the ground in Afghanistan now? Do you feel safe? with the Taliban having taken over? Are you scared for your life, your friends and your family's lives? What's the outlook for you?
You know, as I mentioned before, there is a vacuum of the government. I mean, the government has not been announced, so everybody is living in an uncertain situation. What will happen to their lives tomorrow? So this uncertainty itself is a big psychological pressure on all, including us. And in the previous government, there were many projects which were aimed at advocacy for the women, for the rights of women and children, which may not, although in public, the new government, de facto government, has declared that they will respect all this, but many human rights activists who were working for the rights of women are afraid of what will happen to them. So this is a great concern for all. And one thing I would like to add, that if we stop aid to the people of Afghanistan, that will prevent empowering people of Afghanistan. And the people in an empowered nation is very essential for a vibrant society to be able to put pressure on the government to make it aligned with the international community. So in my opinion, it's a big mistake to stop aid to Afghanistan. Thank you.
One of our correspondents spent the day yesterday with a young Afghanistan national who had spent 11 months travelling across Europe to get to the UK. He had fled your country. Are you conscious and aware of other Afghanistanis that are looking to get out of the country now and have made that journey? And if they are, what is it about coming to the UK that they're so keen to do?
Yeah, that itself will be the consequence of poverty, lack of international aid, and many young. If you would interview many young youngsters here in Afghanistan who are warning that if they do not find a job here, if they do not have an opportunity of working, they will have to flee the country. They will have to migrate to neighboring countries, and through that to Turkey and Europe and other Western countries. And this is, I think, will backfire. The idea will backfire if we do not continue with aid to Afghanistan, and we do not. If the aid is there, the people will be having jobs there. They will be busy there. So there will be very, very few people will be traveling to other countries for financial purposes.
Quadratilla, thank you so much for your time this morning. It's fascinating talking to you there on the ground.